All right, one more minute and we are going to start. Thanks for joining, everybody. All right, sharp on time. Our Exportia Lab of this month is about getting ready for Europe, and we are going to talk about essential compliance steps, element that every exporter to Europe should know. So there are many advantages to comply with European standards. So pretty much the first one is that it gives you access to 450 million consumers. So that's already a huge advantage. But given also the way the standards are quite stringent and strict, if you comply with those European standards, gives you a good reputation globally. So it's also something not to underestimate. I'm Christelle, I'm your host of the Exportia Lab. I founded Exportia in 2006. We have two offices, one in Paris and one in Sydney. And we've worked together with my beautiful team with over 100 SMEs and startups from all around the world in the European market. And we have a good track record of scaling a number of companies to multi-million euros and beyond. We've done that for quite a while now, and I'm writing books about the European market. Some of you have it somewhere on your desk or in your Kindle, and I have a new book which will be coming up in 2026. I'm working on it. All right, but how did the journey start? So I started my journey driving throughout Europe, 10,000 kilometers a month, setting up a distribution network in Europe for small business. Then I moved to IBM in Paris and I sold technical solutions to large insurance and bank, and I had a 40 million euro turnover. Then 20 years ago, migrated to Australia and started Exportia. So that's how it all started. But what are we here today? Why did I pick the topic of compliance? Well, compliance is a topic where, our clients are small business owners. They can be medical doctors, they can be engineers, they can be specialists in their field, but they're not always a compliance expert. And so one day I had a call from Australia in Australia, which is the Australian Trade Commission, and they said, could you please talk to this company? They're selling in Europe and they're wondering about compliance. So when I chatted to the gentleman, what happened, and it was a product similar to, you must be wondering, why is she displaying a nappy? This was a product in that area, and basically, the gentleman was telling me that they were already selling into Europe, specifically in Ireland, and that the distributor hadn't told them that they had to comply with CE. So I had to explain to him that it wasn't the role of their distributor to tell him what to comply with, and that they had to do their own due diligence, and that they had to really know what that was about and what they had to comply with. Ultimately, the responsibility with compliance, conformity of your products, and the security and safety of your product is your responsibility as a manufacturer, software developer, service provider. It's what you produce. And so you cannot really delegate that responsibility. Of course, a distributor might let your electronics product under the rain in winter, under the wrong conditions. It's then, of course, their responsibility, but overall, you're responsible for your products and their quality. All right, we are going to look at, so my goal today is, I am not an expert in every single topic, but I get those questions all the time by small businesses and startups. I get asked those questions all the time. So I have put 7 elements that I think that are really important in terms of compliance for you to sell into the European market. And we could almost have had one expert on each topic, but this is what we're going to go through, and in 30 minutes, the main principles, and there are things for you to plan for and to think about. All right, we're going to look at basic principles, product compliance. We are going to look at privacy, cybersecurity, sustainability, the EU Act, a new one, and what compliance means at the local level. There is EU and then there's the countries. How does that work? So we are going to check that. All right, basic principles. Most in Europe, in the EU, most compliance obligations are stated by at the European Union level, and they are applicable EU-wide. That's generally in principle. And as you know, since Brexit, UK has a separate compliance obligations. You know that. You really need to understand your obligations, make sure you comply. I recommend that even if when we are a CEO of a business or the business owner, some of you are on this audience today, I know some of you, and so basically train yourself on what does that mean to be compliant in such and such field. You can use AI today because that gives you very good sources. Check the sources. You can get formal training, of course. Ultimately, you will need to get expert advice to make sure you follow the rules and you are compliant. All right, AI is just to give you a broad brush understanding for you to be able to understand what you have to set up. But ultimately, an expert will be here to review, check, make sure you comply. So it can be, depending on the topic, certification consultant. You can have a legal advice on privacy. You can have an IT security specialist talking to you about cybersecurity, and you can have a specialist advising you on sustainability as well and the environment. Another principle, which is quite important, is to be keeping an eye, constantly keep monitoring the market and the regulatory changes. The way to do it is quite simple. This is how I do it when I want to monitor something. I set up alerts. I set up Google alerts, or I register to newsletter by experts in different fields to get the latest information on a specific topic. So I advise you do that for your own field and your own product or specialty. Let's go to number 2 out of the 7. Product compliance. So you would know what is CE mark. I know some of you have gone through the process. So CE mark is the legal commitment that you make that your product is safe and compliant with EU rules. It's like a legal commitment. So it declares that your product complies with all the EU legislation, including safety, health, environmental requirement. Some examples of directives that describe how to comply and how to reach CE. So there are some of, you will have to first find what directive, what regulation applies to you, to your product. So it means also, as a manufacturer, what you have to do is you have to declare that you comply to all the relevant legislation. You have to take full responsibility that your product is assessed. You have to prepare and sign the EU Declaration of Conformity, and you have to affix CE mark on your product. It needs to be visible and easy to read for everybody. In some cases, it's more on the high-risk products. There might be, so for example, diagnostic medical devices in the high-risk categories, or pressure equipment, personal PPE, personal protective equipment. There might be a notified body that will actually evaluate your product. If you have your compliance process when had to go through a compliance body, you would certainly already know that you have to put the identification number of that notified body of course. The other part that you need to meet is the regulation on market surveillance. So what does that mean? So basically, the European Union is saying, okay, on our market, we want to make sure that the products that are sold to our consumers or to our businesses are safe. So there's health and safety in general. They want health and safety in the workplace, but also in the public. And they want to protect consumers. So there's also protection of the environment that it needs to comply to, public security, and protection of other interest, public interest is what I mean to say. So what does that mean? In the market surveillance, what you need to ensure is that there is a responsible economic operator. So it can be you as a manufacturer, as a business, you have a subsidiary in Europe, you have an office, and so that's fine. You can be the contact person for the authorities if they need to ask questions, or you can nominate an authorized representative that is established in the EU. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a sec. That responsible economic operator will cooperate with the authorities if there is any control, any question. They will provide the technical documentation. They will also be subject to inspections. They might receive the visit of an inspector, and they will take the correct support and implement corrective actions and enforce any actions they need to do if there's non-compliance that is to be found. So that's their role. That's market surveillance. And so as part of the market surveillance obligation, you need to appoint a European Union authorized representative if you don't have an office in Europe. And that can be your importer. Somebody importing your goods into Europe can be nominated as your EU authorized representative, or you can designate a representative by mandate and mandate them in writing. What they do is they hold the compliance documentation. They respond to any request. They notify authorities. They have to notify the authorities if there's a risk of non-compliance, and they have to cooperate. You also have to put their name on your product so that a consumer, a user can see it and can contact the EU authorized representative. A question I often have, okay, we are a software business. We're not a product. Do I need to comply with that? Do I need to get CE? Okay. So if your software affects the safety or operation of a device that needs to comply with CE, in that case, you also need to comply with that given regulation. My software is operated on the machine and it affects its operation, maybe its safety. If it doesn't work, if there's any issue, then I need to comply with that. I need to check on the machine directive regulation what I need to comply with in terms of safety. And I also need to comply on the market surveillance aspect. There's an annex 1 on the market surveillance regulation with a list of all the directives that fall under that, and you need to check that too. So that's a quick extract on the Annex 1 with all the list of different products. It's just a quick overview. The other aspect that I often get asked is our user manual. Do we have to translate them? Yes, you do. In the official language of the country where you are going to sell. So you don't need to translate it multilingual straight away. You translate it, you're going to focus on a few countries at the start, you translate in those countries. Labeling, so within the directive, let's say you are a given product, I don't know, an electrical equipment, and you need to comply with the low voltage directive. Well, in that directive, it's going to tell you how you need to labeled the safety warnings and the characteristics of your product. You see on this photo, this is a drug and it needs a specific labeling according to a specific directive as well. Okay, just to be clarifying, even if you don't have an office in Europe, we all know that, right? You need to comply with the European Union regulation if you sell your product to a European consumer or EU business, just to be very, very, very clear. All right. One critical thing that I've seen over the years is you really need to carefully manage the timing to get compliance on time to avoid delays for product launches. Us salespeople, we hate it because we can't sell until the product is CE marked. We all know that. There's some exception. If you need to get it tested, you need to say CE pending, and I know Steven online has done that before. But the reality is to plan a full product launch, you need to be CE compliant. Sometimes I tell to some of our clients that want to work with us, let's not start until you are CE. We can do a market research, get some information, get ready. But really, if we want to sell, you need to be compliant first. All right. The added bonus to CE mark, it's quite well known. And it has a lot of fast track, not quite recognition, but it has some recognition. So, for example, in Turkey, it has implemented its own CE marking framework that aligns with CE mark. So it helps you in getting compliance in Turkey to be CE compliant in Europe. Switzerland has mutual recognition with a number of the directive for CE. Same for Israel for medical device and IVD. There are some recognition there. So it doesn't mean you don't need to check. You still need to check what applies to that country. And as I said, on basic principles, things change. So always make sure you check. All right, so that's the product. Really, that's the biggest compliance topic you need to work on first and foremost. Then there is privacy. So you've heard, some of you attended my webinar a while ago on GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. So it applies for EU citizens. It's in place since late 2018. And basically, if you process any personal data from users located in the EU, they can be website visitors, prospects, clients, even if you don't sell to them, even if you're not based in Europe, it still applies to you because you are processing personal data. When we say personal data, it also applies to a professional. If you're holding an email address from a professional, it means you will also, it is personal data. Key principles, it needs to be lawful, fair, and transparent. So you need to have needs to be legal to hold it. You need to have a legal basis for it. I'm going to expand into that in a second. It needs to have a purpose limitation. So if you collect this data for a specific and explicit purpose, you can't reuse it for something else, right? If you collect it because you needed to send that information to that client and the client agreed to it, you're not gonna use it for something else, right? Data minimization. So you don't over collect data just in case. You just collect the data you need, the information that you need. You should avoid excessive data collection. Accuracy, you need to maintain accurate data. So somebody goes, you just delete their data. They're not there anymore. They're not in that business. If you think about CRM, storage limitation. So keep your data as long as necessary for the purpose it was collected. So you can keep, so for example, for us, when we talk to those companies over quite a few years, we always ask them, may I contact you again if they're not interested now, but we want to keep the details. And sometimes they come to an event. we ask them, okay, can we stay in touch from time to time? And also, can we reconnect in a year? And they say yes. And that's how they know that we have the information. We're going to be in touch for 1 more year. And that's a nice way to do it. Integrity and confidentiality. Okay. Personal data must be secured and against unauthorized and unlawful processing. Accidental loss restriction. So that's the security of the data. I'm going to detail that a bit more in cybersecurity. You need to think about that, and you need to be accountable. You need to have a policy. You need somebody to be responsible for it. So what's the impact on small business for us as a small business? I mentioned some example of what we do for our CRM. Well, basically, you ask consent to get their data, or if by default, if you have a contract with them, you need to keep their data, right? Because you need to service them, you need to sell to them. If you have a legal obligation to keep the data, you can keep the data. A vital interest, if you keep their health data and you need to monitor it, and it's quite important. Public data, just trying to grab my chair. Public data, public task, if it's you have an official mandate to keep it, you have to keep it, or a legitimate interest, having a good reason. All right, simple ways to comply. I mentioned how we do it when we talk to people. May I stay in touch with you? May I keep your details in our database? Would you like to receive a newsletter? That's how you have the different consent for different purposes. Have a GDPR policy. All of you should have that, for sure. I don't even dare asking if somebody doesn't have it. Adding an opt-out. I mean, if you don't do business in Europe, fair enough. But you should have a privacy policy for your own business locally anyway. And if you do intend to do business in Europe, you really need to do that rapidly. GDPR policy. And adding an opt-out, and then keep records and consent recorded. So little things like what we do at trade shows, adding a GDPR consent, asking them, do you want to be added to a newsletter? Can I send you an email with information? And you can do that as you collect their information. Okay, general data protection regulation. We have a webinar on our website. In the follow-up email with this recording, you will have the link to this GDPR webinar. Okay, cybersecurity. I hope everybody's feeling all right, talking about and is feeling okay with the topic of compliance. Okay, cybersecurity. So as I said before, GDPR implies that you have to keep the data safe in your business, data of your customers, of your prospective customers. And then there's a main cybersecurity law, which is called NIS 2. And it was in force in 2023 and with national implementations on October 2024. Okay, it mainly applies to people providing digital infrastructure, managed IT service provider, online marketplaces and platforms. So that's for software people. And also, if you are in the financial, in the critical infrastructure, critical sectors, finance, transport, energy, healthcare, you need to have you need to comply with the cybersecurity directive. Okay, what does that mean for us SMEs? Do we need to comply or not? Well, if we operate in a critical sector, I have a software and I'm supplying my software in the energy sector, in healthcare, and I've got a lot in my software. I've got a lot of patient record. I need to comply. I need to make sure I comply. Okay, even also if you don't fall into the scope of NIS 2, it just shows you, it trickles down the supply chain. It shows that small businesses may be asked to prove that they've got basic cybersecurity practices. I have seen that. So you need to show that you have a risk management policy, some kind of incident response plan. So first of all, be insured. You have your cybersecurity insurance in place. Of course, we all do. And align with basic cybersecurity standards. Get some help from your IT provider. They can help you. Also, when doing business in Europe, be ready to demonstrate that you have those security practices with your data. I have recently responded to some tenders, and that was asked in the tender to be able to explain our cybersecurity policy. So quite interesting. And also I was asked about our GDPR policy and how we were managing data for the project and so on. So just be aware of that. I forgot to mention that most government, whether you come from the US or you come from anywhere in Asia or in Australia, New Zealand, there are a lot of support for small businesses around cyber. And so you can get a lot of help to get ready for that. This is Europe, so sustainability matters and you have to be ready for it. So there are different directives that are quite important to think about. So the collection of the waste at the end of life of your product. So you can work with your distributors to organize that, or you can work with a local provider that can help you look after that. The packaging and the packaging waste. I have seen a lot of requirements from clients asking to reduce the waste, opening the plastic, opening of the packages and having something that is more sustainable in terms of material, but also minimizing it. So there's a directive for that. REACH is a very well-known directive in the chemical sector. Doesn't apply to everybody. Sorry, so it's only for people in the chemical sector. But you need to declare any dangerous chemicals that may enter the European Union. There's a regulation for that applies. And then there is an environmental liability directive. So the rule is that even a small operator, if you pollute the environment or damage the environment, there is a rule for you it will apply to you will have some fines and you will need to restore that. So it's quite important in manufacturing, in logistics. If you have a big truck traveling around and carrying some nasty chemicals, you need to make sure you're aware of that. Okay, eco-design, making by design a product eco-friendly with less materials, smarter components that require less space, that are recyclable. So these type of things as well. So what does that impact into Europe? Well, when you deal with distributors or with partners, they will commonly ask you if you have a sustainability policy. I've had that before several times. And also they will, especially if it's a physical good, they will ask you, is your packaging up to standard? Can you avoid plastic, this type of thing? And can it be minimized? Also in government and large corporate tenders, I have seen several times a criteria in terms of sustainability being apparent, and I'm already almost running a 30-minute of the lab. So sustainability is important. Compliance in AI. So I'd like to push that for another lab, but basically in 2026 we'll have a lab about the EU AI Act. And I think we have quite a lot in our audience. We have quite a lot of AI companies. So it's the first ever legal framework on AI, and it addresses the risk of AI. And Europe wants to be to play in the leading role in that field. So it's the regulation, the act actually classifies different types of AI risk: an acceptable risk, high risk, limited, and then minimal. And so there is different rules for different level of risk. In terms of enforcement, so high risk would be, or unacceptable risk would be, AI used to manipulate human behavior, enable social scoring, this type of thing. It's already starting to be in force. So it's since mid-2024, still fairly new. And I'm aware that some SMEs, some of our clients already in the AI space are already have a policy that is compliant to the EU AI Act. So if you are active in AI and you haven't looked at that and you're looking at Europe, this is something I would look at. And watch out, we're going to have an expert talking about that 2026. All right, compliance at the country level. So we've met our EU standards. So do we need to comply with anything else at the country level? Really? All right, let me clarify that for you. So the EU regulation is harmonized for compliance, and it's any regulation is like a law that is automatically implemented and adopted by all EU countries. So, for example, the medical device regulation or the market surveillance regulation, the general data protection regulation, by default, it's adopted in every country. So you don't need to worry about anything else. The only thing that happens is if there are some directives, so regulation, EU-wide directive, then if it's a directive, then it sets goal, minimum standards, and member states need to implement it in their own national law. What does that mean for product compliance? So you see here you have machine directive, radio equipment directive, and so on. What does that mean? Don't panic. Don't panic. It's fine. It still falls under CE mark. So if you comply with the machinery directive, you have your CE mark. It applies to all the EU countries. Good news. The only thing that will happen is the legislation by country will specify at the country level who are the market surveillance authorities, which are the bodies that are going to be responsible at the local level for market surveillance, how it's going to be enforced, the directive, the penalties, inspections, they do that at the local level. And then in terms of language, especially in a country where there's multiple languages, they're going to specify which language do they want in every language or not. They're going to specify that. And if it's actually applicable and you have a high risk product, it will also specify the notified body. All right, things to consider that are not really compliance related, but you often have as well on top of that some kind of industry guidelines. In the medical sector, we have clinical guidelines on how to do things, how to apply procedures. So it's more industry recommendations, best practices. Then you also need sometimes in the medical sector but not only, to register your product at the local level by a local administration. And then there are your local habits. And I think then you're all set. I think you're all set. You don't need to. So let's review everything. We've got the basic principle. I'm the manufacturer, the software developer. Ultimately, I'm responsible. So I better know what I'm talking about and get ready. If I need to comply with CE for my products, if I'm a software, I need to look if my software has an impact on a CE compliant product, and I need to look at that regulation. If I don't have an office in Europe, I need to designate an EU authorized representative. Privacy, remember to collect consent and store only the data needed, have a GDPR policy. if you intend to work with the European market. Cybersecurity, have a review by your IT provider, an insurance, a cybersecurity insurance, and good practices to keep your data safe, which anyway, for any business, to be honest, you would already be doing that. Sustainability, how do you reduce your packaging? How do you design your product so that it's eco-friendly? How do you minimize the impacts? And do you have a sustainability policy? Ultimately, number 3, number 4, number 5, you will need, if you respond to tender or respond to offers, you will probably need to provide that in your response. EU AI Act, I don't want to say too much about it because I would like to have a separate lab on it with an expert. Okay, and local level, yes, there are a little bit of local laws that apply, but generally speaking, it's more EU-wide, but be informed and get the relevant information when you are launching your product in a specific European country. All right, complying with European standards is a key gateway of doing business in Europe, access to 450 million consumers. And it's a great asset in global markets, very good recognition. And it's also a great way to be a better business, in my opinion. And so your challenge for 2026 is maybe in those 7 elements, you have identified a gap in your business. So pick an area, get yourself trained on it, and identify, I can help you identify an expert on it and and tackle it. Get ready. All right, you can talk to us about EU AR services from our French office. If you're preparing for your compliance with CE, we'd be happy to help. And in February, and I'm really running late, in February, we're going to start again our Exportia Lab. I'm just going to check if there are any questions. In February, we are going to have an Exportia Lab around pricing, quoting for European customers and distributors. After that, I'm anticipating to have other topics around branding, the EU AI Act, and I'd like to give you an update on EU funding as well. So I really I hope you enjoyed this compliance session. I'm running a bit late, sorry, a bit over time. I'm hoping that you have a good break and I will see you in the new year. See you very soon.